Hello everyone, welcome back for session 4 of our small group study. In this final session, we're going to cover the last 3 tests from Proving Ground 2.0. The first test that we're going to talk about is the offense test. This test will come to prove that you're not easily offended and that you have the potential to readily forgive others. Jesus lived an unoffended life when he had every opportunity to be offended. Think about it. He was constantly criticized and questioned, no matter what he did. On numerous occasions, he healed people, and instead of praise, he received criticism. Even his own followers betrayed, denied, and doubted him. But Jesus refused to live the offended life. Now, you might be saying to yourself right now, well, Pastor Kevin, I'm not Jesus, and if you knew how I was treated, what was said to me or done to me, you would understand that I have every right to be offended. And you may have the right to be offended today, but it doesn't lessen its consequences in your life. For some crazy reason, we assume that holding on to an offense evens the score with the person who offended us. When the truth is that if we hold on to an offense, it doesn't hurt them, it hurts you. My hope is that you'll begin to recognize the power that awaits you every time that you say no to offense, and every time you make the decision to push past the opportunity to be offended. To pass the test, the offense test, I want to encourage you to see every offense in 2 stages. Stage 1 is the feeling of offense. This is what you feel when offense comes. You've probably had this happen even this week or maybe even today. Something someone did or said hurt you and you felt offended. The feeling of offense is really not something you can control. Everyone feels offended. But then there's stage 2. Stage 2 is the choice to live or not live offended. This is the stage that many people are unaware of. They assume that feeling offended leaves them with no choice but to live offended. However, just because you feel offended doesn't mean that you have to live offended. Stage 1 is about someone giving you an opportunity to be offended. I mean, they hand you this big glass of offense that you can drink. But stage 2 provides an opportunity for you to put the drink down before you take a sip. It's your choice. It's my choice to live offended or not. In other words, I would just say today, don't drink the poison. When you have a chance, don't drink it. When you make the choice not to live offended and you pour out the poison, you're choosing the path toward a healthy and a blessed life.
The test that I faced was the offense test, and I could look back all the way to age 3 when I first started feeling offended, and it was when I was sexually abused, and my abusers would tell me that I can't say anything, that my voice doesn't matter, no one's gonna believe me, and I kind of faced that test my entire life, even till now. And in college, I had a gal tell me in front of a group of 40 of my peers that my opinion didn't matter and that my idea was stupid. And so just even facing that caused me to shut down. When I'm facing the offense test, I feel a lot of shame and fear of still feeling like my voice doesn't matter and why even say anything. What caused me to overcome the offense test was a meeting with my mentor, and she just looked at me very stern and said, "Do you realize how powerful your voice was?" And it was the first time I think I ever realized how much this offense has had a hold over me for so many years. Passing the offense test has been empowering for me to be able to recognize that I've been holding on to something that wasn't mine, that I no longer have to drink the poison. When I have those thoughts of being in a room and I have to give my opinion, like I'm excited to do it and I'm not afraid of being offended anymore. If you're facing the offense test, what I would say to you is to not stay stuck. Don't sit in it. Don't let it define you and carry it to your future. Just stop it right there and don't drink the poison.
Now let's move on to the test of time. This test comes to prove your endurance and your patience and your ongoing confidence in various seasons of your life. Passing the test of time is going to require you to have vision for where you want to go in your future. When we lock in on a vision, something happens to the way that we see our present and how we spend our time. Jesus repeatedly affirmed that he knew where he was going and what his destiny was and why he was doing it. His vision and his destiny fueled his daily decisions and how he spent his time each day. Now, you might think that you're lacking the skills and the discipline of the time currently to achieve greatness, but it could be that you're lacking the vision to direct your skill development or the vision to motivate your discipline or vision to dictate, in other words, how you manage your time. People who pass the test of time also learn to think both in short and long term. These people greatly consider how their thoughts and their words, their actions, their behaviors, and their choices today will affect them down the road. A long-term thinker, for example, will make positive health choices now so they have a better chance at being healthy later. At a young age, a long-term thinker will make decisions like nobody else by being disciplined in their finances so that they can benefit like nobody else later as they enjoy having great wealth. Long-term thinkers are also able to trust God during times of waiting, preparation, and sometimes even in hardship. Let's consider these biblical examples. Noah prepared the ark for over 50 years before the predicted rains fell. Abraham and Sarah waited 25 years for their promised son. Joseph waited 14 years in prison for a crime that he did not commit. David waited 15 years between the time that he was anointed to become king over Israel and when he finally was recognized by the nation as the king. The Jewish men and women who were in exile for 70 years as their hearts and minds were prepared to make a return to Jerusalem and a nationwide revival. Paul prepared for 15 years between his calling and his first missionary journey, and another 5 until he writes his first New Testament letter. Think about all that God did within these men and women during their period of waiting and preparation. Would they have been able to handle God's calling and God's blessing had they not gone through that season of waiting? Their faith, trust, obedience, and skills were all being developed as God sculpted them into who they needed to be in order to accomplish what God had set them apart to do. What is it that God is wanting to do within you as you wait and prepare for His promises to be fulfilled in your life? Well, here's the good news. If you're facing the test of time, that means you still have some time left. So make the most of it.
So the test of time is definitely the test that I walk through the most in my life, growing up and even currently. And I would definitely say the most pivotal moment with that was when I was 25 years old. I had been at my job for about 4 years, and I just got this overwhelming desire to do something different, that I knew that my life was meant to have a bit more of an impact than I was having in my regular 9-to-5. And so I made a decision to quit my full-time job and move across the country to LA, where I did not know a soul. But I knew that this would be an opportunity for me to serve people, to really dig into ministry in a new way that I never thought could really exist. And so I quit my job. I paid to intern, and all at 25, which for some people might think that's not old, that's not young. It's right smack dab in the middle. But at that time, my parents had a huge influence on my life, and they wanted the best for me, but they both thought it was a really crazy thing for me to do, mostly because for them at that age, they had been in their careers already. Their goals were very short term. It was like graduate high school, get a job, build a family and call it good, and live in your little box. And I just wanted so much more than that. And so I would say I challenged that influence, and I challenged the fact that I was 25 years old, and I wanted to take a risk. And that was the first time I would say I challenged the issue of time and what that would look like in my overall life. I would say the biggest result of really passing the test of time has been I've been able to stop thinking short term and start thinking long term. I've been able to really dig into not only what my future could be like if I follow the call of God and take a risk, but what my family's future could look like. That now my husband and my kids can have a different impact in this world. That it's not just about doing the mundane and living like a gray lifestyle, for lack of a better word, but really challenging that and really realizing that we are created to do great things. For the person facing the test of time, I would say silence the negative voices around you, and really take an opportunity to lean into God and trust that He's the one that created you. He is the author and controller of all time. And so if there's a plan that He has for you, if there's a purpose He has for you, nothing or no one can stop it. And that's just the reality. And it seems like a crazy thing to believe in, but He's the God of miracles. There's nothing that He cannot do. And so be brave in your decisions and be bold in the calling that's been placed on your life, because the reality is that no one can do what you can do. No one can influence the people that you can influence. No one can love the people that you can love the way you do. And so lean into that, trust that. That's probably my biggest piece of advice.
Now, the ninth and final test of the Proving Ground 2.0 is the Lordship Test. This test occurs when you are in a position or situation where you must choose to obey God over your personal preference and natural instincts. An example of that with Jesus is when He walked the earth, He subjected Himself to all of the same temptations and tests that we face as humans, which means that He even went through the Lordship Test. We see a good example of this in the Garden of Gethsemane. He knew that He had only hours left until He would be nailed to a cross, and He had a choice to make: deny His flesh and submit to the Father's will, or submit to His flesh and deny the Father's will. In a moment of confession, He tells 3 of His disciples, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." Now, after telling them to keep watch, He went into the garden and He fell with His face to the ground and He prayed, "My Father, if it's possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet, not as I will, but as you will." Jesus' natural human instincts were telling Him to run away from what the Father had asked Him to do on the cross. This is the tension of the Lordship Test. Some of what God tells you to do is going to contradict your own instincts. And if you give in to your flesh and ignore the authority and instruction of God, you will never experience all of the blessing that God has for you. And you'll not complete all that God has created you to accomplish. Thankfully for us, Jesus passed the Lordship Test, and his life's work has become an example for all of us. This is the test that proves how much you let God actually be the leader and the Lord of your life every day. In order to pass the Lordship Test, we must make a decision to abandon our tendency to lean on our own understanding and instead acknowledge God's understanding and follow his way of doing things. The great news is that when we do this, it will allow the full blessings of God to be realized in our lives. The Bible says that if you fully obey the Lord your God and carefully follow all of his commands that I give you today, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations on the earth. And all these blessings will come upon you and accompany you if you obey the Lord your God. Now, many of us are able to recognize the Lordship of God during the times of blessing when we're enjoying the feast, but it's important to remember that God is still Lord during the difficult times in life, when you're feeling the famine. In fact, many of God's blessings are not going to be for you here and now, but for the future generations to come. We read about this generational blessing in the life of Isaac. When there was a famine in the land, Isaac planned to leave and to go to Egypt. But it says the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "Do not go down to Egypt. Live in the land where I tell you to live, and stay in the land for a while, and I will be with you, and I will bless you. For to you and your descendants," isn't that good? "For to you and your descendants, I will give all of these lands, and I will confirm the oath that I swore to your father Abraham. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give them all of these lands. And through your offspring, all nations on earth will be blessed." This promise to Isaac required two things. First of all, Isaac needed to obey God and stay in the land even though there was a famine. He needed to trust God, that God was also the Lord of the famine. But secondly, God tells Isaac the other reason for this blessing to come when he said that it was because Abraham obeyed me and he did everything that I required of him, keeping my commands and my decrees and my instructions. God is saying to Isaac, if you don't trust me and leave this area that I have instructed you to stay in, then you will put yourself out of position for my blessing that your father put you in position for. He is essentially saying to Isaac, I know it is not looking good right now, but stay the course. Trust me through the famine. And then someday you will see my blessing unleashed on your family. We go on to read the result in the very same year after Isaac stayed in the land. And here's what the Bible says. Isaac planted crops in that land, and the same year he reaped 100-fold because the Lord blessed him. The man became rich, and his wealth continued to grow until he became very wealthy. God used a famine to test Isaac's trust and obedience. But remember, it was also a famine that allowed Joseph to be reunited with his brothers. And it was during a time of famine in the wilderness that God's people had to trust that God would provide food for them each day in the form of manna. Even think about the people who experienced a miracle after they followed Jesus' instruction to sit down as he broke 5 loaves and 2 fishes into pieces and fed all 15,000 of those who were there. So no matter what season that you're in, pass the Lordship Test by trusting God, whether it is feast or famine.
I feel like I've faced the Lordship Test maybe a couple of different ways, different seasons, different circumstances, but the one that really stands out to me would be at a time probably in my early 20s, and really just having a major financial struggle, trying to make ends meet, and new things happening, new seasons, getting ready to get married. So lots of extra pressure and lots of things going on that just created this situation where I get to choose, do I want to trust God, and do I want to do what I believe that the Bible has taught us to do? Do I want to honor my church and honor my pastors, or do I want to follow my instinct and just hold on to everything that's mine, namely my money, namely the resources that I have? And this kind of hoarder mentality is kind of what that created, and just kind of created this awkward dilemma to be in the middle of. I mean, in the middle of that season, I definitely feel anxiety, feel fear. I know for me, and I don't know if it's just my personality type or if it's a guy thing, but feeling lack of control is a scary situation. It's uncomfortable to feel like you're not in control of what's going to happen tomorrow. And so for me, just right in the middle of all those emotions kind of swirling around, it just really creates this uncomfortable feeling, this uneasiness every morning when you wake up, and definitely every night when you put your head down to sleep. You know, what helped me get through the Lordship Test was I got on the phone with my mom, and gosh, I love my mom. She's so awesome, and I'm sitting in a car in a parking lot stressing out of my mind, but I really know what I need to do. And I get on the phone, I call Mom, and I say, Mom, what would Dad do? And for me, my father passed away when I was 13 months old. And still to this day, I meet people that when they hear my last name, they say, Daryl Siebold. And there's some sort of, yeah, that was my dad. And they'll tell me some great story about something that he did. And the red theme, the red thread that goes throughout every single one of these stories is some crazy level of generosity. And so for me, my mom, the example was give more in this season. So for me, that looked like going from 10% and being kind of faithful with giving 10% of my income to God, to being absolutely faithful and actually going from 10% up to 20%. And it was a commitment that I made. God, I feel like I don't even have 10%, but I'm going to trust you, and I'm going to put my money where my mouth is and go from 10% to 20%. And I'm going to keep doing this until you see me through this season. And the amazing thing about that was, I would say 3-4 months into it, every single one of those obstacles that was creating that financial stress for me started to melt away. My job situation changed. My living situation changed. And just thing after thing began to fall away. And for me, I believe it was the step of faith to trust God, put God in his right place, which is lordship, and trust that he's going to take care of me on the other side of it. The result of passing that test for me has been, from that time on, never questioning again, where is God and my money? Where does God fit with my money? From that day forward, every single time I am considering God in every financial decision I make, in every budgeting meeting that I have with my wife. Every time that we think about money, we think about God and we think about the local church. If you are in the Lordship Test right now, what I would say to you is the Lordship Test, getting through that is really all about taking a step of faith and putting God in his right place. When you step out of your instinct, when you step out of your comfort zone by taking a step of faith, it puts God in the position that he needs to be, because now I've got nothing. I have to trust God. And so for me, my Lordship Test is really not about money. The money was just the means of me putting God in his proper place. So for you, maybe that's your relationships. Maybe that's your finances. Maybe that's your spouse. Maybe that is an addiction that you're dealing with. I don't know what you're dealing with, but the advice to you would be to take a step of faith, something measurable, and put God in his right place where you have to trust him, and he's going to see you onto the other side of it.